I am so afraid of rejection. How many of us have said this to ourselves or even out loud when it comes to doing something we're not comfortable with, doing something brand new, doing something we know is going to have an impact, a positive impact in our lives and take us to new heights that only one can dream of. But instead, we allow the rejection, the fear, the doubt, the scarcity mindset to take over. I'm afraid of rejection. Okay, now what? Welcome back to the Keys podcast. My name is Lillian Hernandez, but I also go by Lilly. And in today's episode, we are talking about rejection. Okay, as you see from the title, I am so afraid of rejection, opportunities and redirection. We're going to go on both ends of this conversation and talk about how rejection is hurting us, but also the opportunities for redirection when you are faced with said rejection. So let's get straight into it, okay? Rejection is a key to life, truly. I've realized over the years, especially in these last couple of years where I've been faced with the most adversity in my business, the most adversity financially, I've realized how much I've excelled in life due to rejection because I no longer allowed it to be a barrier in my life. I no longer allowed it to be a place of residency in my mind, even in my body, for longer than it needed to be. We're all human. We're all going to feel fears of being pushed away, being turned down, being broken up with, being fired, being laid off. And it's not to say that those moments don't suck. They are terrible. I'm still traumatized from the day I was laid off. And even the day I said I quit. I remember being in one of our conference rooms at the office I used to work at, and I shut all the lights off when I had to make that dreadful phone call that I knew was going to change my life. But the rejection, the fear I had in that moment of them saying, no, you can't quit. Mind you, I'm a full grown adult. I'm around 32 at this point. 32 or 33, I forget. But I was so afraid of them telling me no, that I couldn't quit, that it took me days to finally make that call. And when I say make the call, it was because it was after hours and everyone had already gone home. I was so nervous. I was like, well, if I do it when no one's in the office, it'll be less intimidating. And I made the phone call in the dark, but I got it done. And I never factored in that I was the one doing the rejecting and how empowering that felt in the oddest way. But looking back now, going on my 8th year, had I not made that decision to say I quit, I don't know where I would be in life. If I had stayed at that job at that 9 to 5, expecting them to just take care of me and coddle me and just collect a check every week and always be in a state of wonder. Oh, I wonder what would have happened if I had made that phone call. I wonder what would have happened if I had even tried. I would have stayed timid. I would have stayed quiet, and I think I would have been okay, but it just wouldn't have felt right. Like something would have always felt off if I had stayed back there. I think I would have eventually gotten to the point of I quit, but it would have been a much more difficult road had I waited any longer. And I'm grateful for that moment, but I never considered that I was the one doing the rejecting. I was so afraid of being rejected that I ended up being the one essentially hurting someone else's feelings, changing the course of people's lives because of my single decision. We all want life to work out. We all want the ideas we have in our head to turn out perfect, to be smooth, to not have any rigidity or pain. But the reality of it is we can't avoid that. That's a part of the process. That is the mess. That is the junk. And I know what it's like to have a big idea. And I know many of us as well can attest to this. In fact, I speak to many of you on a daily basis in my coaching calls. And you have this big idea. Oh, I want to quit my 9 to 5. I want to be a transaction coordinator. I want to be free. I want to have location independence. And as soon as you get a taste of the reality of building a business, starting a business, you get your first experience with what makes you think you can do that. And someone's out there doubting you, hating you. And it could be someone you love and you're close to, or someone telling you like, you're not fit to do that. you're this. Like they're already identifying you and labeling you as this person, but they've never seen you in this space because it's brand new. So instead of pursuing the thing wholeheartedly, now we're pursuing it a little wounded. So a few ways that has helped me to combat rejection, whether I anticipate it or not, is simply to just not take it personally. I know that sounds easier said than done, but I read the book, The Four Agreements. I actually overheard someone else talking about this book, and they were saying it's their favorite book. And I said, you know what? If this person enjoys reading, let me give it a try. And out of all the four agreements, it was don't take it personally that stood out the most. And that's been a principle I've kept for all of these years. And in those moments where I feel afraid or intimidated about something, or even angered or bothered, I do my best to not take it personally. I'm an Aries. I'm not much into astrology, but I know enough to know that Aries have a bad rep. And Aries is a ram. And I have a very forward personality. I love hard. I enjoy hard. I party hard. And I work hard. So if something I do isn't received or something I pursue doesn't happen right away, I always think, dang, what did I do wrong? I think I should just give up. It goes back to that 0 or 100 mentality. I had to seek out the help. And this is another aspect of combating rejection, is asking for help, asking for feedback, touching base with the people that you deem ahead of you or who have more experience in this field, a mentor, a coach. For me, it was a therapist. When I was talking to my therapist, I said, I have this attitude of 0 or 100. There's no in between. There's no 0 to 100. And I've referenced this on this show before. And I had to learn the gray areas of it all. Just because I was rejected, it doesn't mean that was due to a character flaw or a lack of skills. It could have just been timing, restructuring of a company, or maybe the wrong job description. Before I get into this very compelling story, I want you all to visit my website, lillianhernandez.com, to learn more about my coaching services, as well as other content that I have produced. But most importantly, schedule a one-on-one with me if you have questions about rejection, ways to handle it, and improve your business without allowing rejection to impact you on a daily basis. Now let's get back to the show. In fact, true story, I would not be self-employed if I wasn't rejected from an original job opportunity that was presented to me. And if this story is redundant, I'm going to tell it one more time, but I'm going to condense it as short as possible. But I was reached out to while I was working at my 9-to-5 for a transaction coordinator position for a brand new startup company. It was a real estate startup here in San Francisco. And basically they said, yeah, we need a transaction coordinator with a lot of tech experience. And we're just starting, our company, and we thought you would be a good fit. I was like, yeah, I know tech. And my tech experience back then was like emails, social media. It was nothing fancy. I knew nothing about coding, nothing, right? And I almost didn't go for two reasons. One being I was comfortable at my job. I'd never worked a other job outside of that actually paid more than a couple $100s a month. So that was my first big girl job. Two, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to work Excel. I used the excuse of I don't know Excel to prevent me from exploring other job opportunities. I was so intimidated that I didn't know coding with Excel codes. I had a coworker that was great at Excel, so I looked at her and was just like, oh my God, she's going to get every job she ever wants. And it was that interview that I took, and I said, you know what, if they need someone that does Excel, I'll just kindly decline, or I'll just accept the fact that I won't get the job. And I was thinking back, like Excel, like not once was Excel brought up in that conversation. They didn't care about any of my fancy social media posts, nothing. They just wanted to hear me talk and see what type of person I was and how, if I would be a good fit for their culture in their office. And 3 hours into that interview, I don't remember talking once about anything work related outside of marketing and how the things were going for that particular brokerage I was with. And I ended up leaving a great impression. But had I let the fear of rejection stop me, I would not be sitting here today. If I had let my comfort zone dictate my decisions, I would not be here today. So with all of that said, it's important to ask for help. It's important to understand why you have these fears of rejections. What's it rooted in? Where did it start? Who do you see or picture in your mind when you have a new idea and you get so excited, but then you think about a certain person or persons and you say, oh, no, I'm not good enough. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to pursue that. Then that's the work that needs to be done. Eliminating that person's presence and voice in your mind, in your body, in your space when you're about to make these decisions. It could be you. I was injured earlier this year and I'd gone through something and I had this big idea, but I was sitting on my couch and for the first time I'd heard my own internal voice, my subconscious, come to the surface because I was injured. I couldn't do anything. I could barely move. I pinched a nerve in my neck, right? So I was sitting on my couch for hours on end, just watching TV, had my laptop, doing some work here and there. And I was thinking of ways like, okay, well, if this doesn't work out, how do I, what should I do? And I had this grand idea. And I noticed immediately after I had this big idea, let's just say it was to start this podcast, right? Even though I've already had this podcast for 2 years, but let's just say I never had a podcast. And I was sitting there thinking, oh, I want to start a podcast. Immediately, it wasn't even 10 seconds that had gone by. Did I already put these walls in front of me? Okay, but do you have a mic? Okay, but do you have this? Do you have that? And then I felt myself just melting into the couch, even sinking into the couch even deeper, thinking, yeah, you're right. I don't have a mic. I don't even have money to buy a mic right now because I don't have clients and I don't have business. I started to spiral. And I'm so grateful for that moment in time that I was literally forced to sit down with myself and myself only to hear myself and the way I talk to myself and the way that my subconscious was so negative. And I would deem myself as this positive, happy-go-lucky person, very optimistic, which I am those things. But I didn't realize my own subconscious was betraying me. And from that moment on, it was my birthday month, actually. It was in April. This past April, right before my birthday, I was injured with a pinched nerve in my neck for an entire month. It was the worst pain of my life. And I've had plenty of injuries. But it was in that moment where I was forced to sit down and hear myself talk to myself. And I said, oh my God. Oh my God. This is why I haven't done anything or followed through with anything that I put my mind to. Nothing. I would get started. I'd have this big idea. And then the slightest sense of inconvenience or burden or instability, I would give up. Even if I spent months, even a couple years doing something that was outside of my comfort zone. Hence this large gap with the podcast. It wasn't going the way I thought it would go, and I wasn't willing to put in the time to see how I can improve because I felt rejected. I felt like, oh my God, I put 2 years into this podcast. Well, at that point, I was approaching 2 years. But if you factor in all the preparation I had that summer before I launched, I had given a solid 2 years of my life to this podcast, and it was received pretty well, but it just wasn't, my expectations were so high. Those first couple of years, I look back now and they were just so unrealistic. It's not to say that I couldn't have achieved that, but the strategy and the time I was investing into the show wasn't ever going to equal those numbers that I had. I was being very, what's the word? My ego. I was being arrogant. There's another word, entitled. I felt entitled to my podcast going viral. I felt entitled to my podcast being successful right out the gate. But prior to that, I'd never done a podcast. I didn't have a community. People kind of knew me, but I was just talking to a mic. And then the moment I started to build momentum, but the momentum was still not reaching the heights that I wanted to, I gave up. I stopped. I would constantly stop as soon as it was getting good. But because my good at the time wasn't good enough, I couldn't stand to go to the next level and do another 2 years at that pace. And I realized it was because it's okay to have high expectations, but when you're starting from scratch with anything, the first iteration of those things are going to be bad. They're not going to be good. I had to find ways to stay encouraged, but I just didn't have it in me because I was getting desperate. I was getting desperate because I wanted to be out of my business. I wanted to be out of doing the files. I wanted to not do transaction coordination anymore. So I had put this show in a category that was so rigid that if it didn't work out and if I wasn't making money by this time, I was going to stop it. When in actuality, the podcast was making an impact in an industry that doesn't often have the voice, I was giving a voice to many of the voiceless. And I was breaking down barriers and having conversations that needed to happen that I wish I had many years ago. And I had lost sight of my why because I felt rejected. So I got to a point last year, 2024, and I said, you know what? I need to restructure everything. Everything needs to change. It was also the year I turned 40, so I was entering this new decade, and I said, you know what? I can't continue doing things the way I was doing because all of that was geared towards a version of me that no longer exists. I've gotten the help, therapy, coaches, thousands of dollars spent, hours and hours, days, weeks spent investing in myself. I'm no longer the same person I was a year ago, 2 years ago, 8 years ago when I said I quit. So if I continue at this pace, I'm always going to feel rejected and I'm never going to understand because I'm operating from an old state of, I'm operating from an old mindset. And I said, moving forward, I want to be more convicted. I want to be firm and confident in my decisions. And that's going to require me to just make the decision. So I started doing work on ways to be more confident and convicted in those decisions. I started reading different material, books, and I started reading the Bible. I was never a Bible reader, not a religious person. Always had faith, always believed in God. But the Bible? I mean, yeah, I went to Catholic school, but I had to. My parents forced me to do that. But at 41, no, I was 40. This was the end of quarter 3, quarter 4, and definitely at the top of 2025, where I was like, let me just read the Bible. Let me just see what this thing is about. Let me see what this book is about. And out of all the self-help books and the hours of therapy and coaching that I received, I realized, wow, a lot of these principles have existed in this book. They're just written from a different perspective, a different age, a different era, different problems, but same themes, same outcomes. And I realized, okay, there's no such thing as a bad decision as long as it's rooted in the thing that I'm working towards. The only bad decision is no decision. And that's the attitude I've had this entire year. When I find myself spiraling or when I find myself afraid or procrastinating, we haven't even gotten into procrastination yet. But when I feel myself being triggered or deflate, starting to go down that path of deflation, I take a step back, breathe, journal, exercise, whatever, I have the tools in place. Sometimes it might even be just me sitting still, going into my gratitude journal. I have a note in my notes app dedicated just to gratitude, and that grounds me. And then I'm able to go back onto the field and make decisions that are right. I go back to my why. Why am I doing this in the first place? Have I strayed too far away from my why? Or does my why, is it no longer relevant? And that's when I'm able to make more of an informed decision, a grounded decision, a firm decision with confidence, courage, conviction. And for those out there that are experiencing fear, doubt, insecurities, intimidation, procrastination, you feel like you're spiraling or just on this hamster wheel of indecision, first, I want you to understand you are not alone. You are not alone. And although this experience may feel overwhelming, it may feel like you're running out of time, that sense of urgency is real. That level of desperation is getting thicker and thicker. But what's most important right now is to take your time, breathe, hydrate, eat. Are you getting good sleep? Fixing the little things that we can control. And if certain things feel way out of your control, if you aren't able to have self-compassion, if you don't know what your stress reducers are, or maybe you don't know what your triggers are, it's okay to seek help. That is a lesson that I'm learning each and every day, especially as I get older. I realize I can't do all this alone. I don't want to do any of this alone. Some stuff I do have to have, take responsibility and do myself and put in the work after I've asked others for help or complained out of my too many times to recount. But just know that there's help out there. Therapy, coaching, fitness, friends, family, talking, or sometimes just listening to how you speak to yourself and replacing that with words of affirmation. For every negative thought you have like a counter. Because I didn't believe it for myself until I actually heard it sitting on my couch. That one random, it was like a Wednesday. And I was sitting there like in shock. Because at first I was like, whose voice was that? I know that wasn't me. That was a harsh reality to accept. But once you accept who you are and recognize, okay, this area needs to be improved, I'm going to dedicate the next 3 months to altering that, to fixing that. Because I want it better. I want a quality life. I want to move forward with more courage, more decisiveness. And if that requires me to fix a few of my habits, the way I speak to myself, the way I speak to others. Because I'll tell you this much. I love to hype people up. I love to encourage people. And I've realized if I'm not encouraging myself, how is any of this going to be impactful to anyone else? So you are going to experience a lot of reality checks in this process, but it's all about taking those first steps, learning to replace rejection and understanding it to be an opportunity. Learning that rejection is simply redirection. So if that resonated with you, let me know. I would love to speak with you one-on-one. I am a coach. I am your coach, whether it's through this podcast, whether it's us working one-on-one, whatever the case may be. Visit my website, lillianhernandez.com. The link will be in the description of this episode because I want to touch base with you all. I want to see where you're at, what you're going through. You're not alone in this process. And if you are feeling alone, at least start somewhere. Start with me if you need to. I could be a sounding board, whatever the case may be. We are in this together. We are each other's support system. And I want to build a community that uplifts and encourages each other often. But also it keeps it real. It's important to keep ourselves accountable and be honest. Like, yo, I'm slacking. I'm slacking this week. I don't feel like doing this podcast, but I know I have to. And I'm so glad I touched base with so-and-so. I'm so glad I met with my coach. I'm so glad I had that therapist appointment. I'm so glad I went to the gym. I'm so glad I stretched this morning. I'm so glad I prayed this morning. Whatever it is for you, keep yourself accountable. Build yourself an accountability crew. We can start one together and take it from there, one step at a time, one fearless step at a time. Rejection's always going to exist, but we can always combat them and defeat them without the feeling of rejection taking over. So thank you again for listening. This is the Keys Podcast. I would love to hear your feedback. And if there are topics you would like for me to discuss, guests you would like to have on the show, or maybe you want to discuss perhaps advertising on the Keys Podcast, whether you have a business, a service, a product, I'm open to having the conversation. Email me thekeyswork@gmail.com, and we can go from there. But this has been another episode of The Keys Podcast. I am your host, Lillian Hernandez. You can call me Lilly, and rejection is redirection.